Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. This is Eight Sided Freaks. Today we are here with a pay-per-view preview. Not as exciting of a pay-per-view preview as it usually is. There's really only two fights worth talking about in detail. So we're only doing full breakdowns on the main event and the co-main event. Those are the two title fights on the card. So we're kind of treating it like a fight night for viewers who watch the fight night previews. It's going to be a little bit closer to that in comparison to, the traditional fight night, in comparison to the traditional pay-per-view style thing, just based on the quality of the card. I mean, the first non-title fight that we'd have to talk about is Justin, or I don't even know which Taffa brother it
What
is,
Toffa
honestly.
brother it is, yeah.
There's really isn't much of a difference, to be honest. But it's a
It's
Taffa
Justin.
Justin. Justin Taffa versus Talishon Teixeira, who's making his UFC debut. So not great scenes. But what that does give us time to do is it gives us a little bit of time to look back to last week's card, which was headlined by Israel Adesanya and Nassourdine Imavov. So we'll talk about that main event and then a couple other pieces of news from that card. So it's going to be a little bit of a split between a traditional preview and a recap. So that is the plan for today. And we will start it off right at the top of UFC 312. We have Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland. I'll start it off with the betting odds right off the jump. Right now we're looking at minus 215 du Plessis with plus 164 on the underdog, Sean Strickland. This is a rematch. They fought last January in Canada, and Dricus du Plessis took the belt from Sean Strickland in the time since. Du Plessis added a win over Adesanya, and Strickland added his little shenanigans with Paulo Costa. Goes down as a victory in the win column, but they didn't do much fighting, so it is what it is. But he's back in a title fight, whether I or anybody else likes it or not. I certainly do not. Um, what do you make of this main event? What do you make of seeing this fight for a second time and seeing this middleweight belt go on the line once again?
I was trying to look up. I mean, I don't love the fight. I know. I can kind of understand it, but like you said, I know you're not the biggest fan of that first fight, and I was working that night, didn't watch it. Heard by all accounts it wasn't that good. Maybe there was a slight little robbery, that the Strickland fans like to always claim, but and I still haven't watched it. I've taken your word for it. And when it comes down to it, though, I just didn't like how. So I was trying to pull up the rankings for middleweight, but like I didn't like how Robert Whitaker and Strickland both beat Paulo Costa. Yet, like Strickland gets the title shot off of it. Whitaker has to fight Aliskerov too, and then fight Chimaev. So I don't know. Kind of seems like Strickland, and wasn't that his first? Was that his first defense too?
Yeah.
After winning the belt, beats Izzy, loses it in his first defense, and then beats Paulo Costa. And I just don't understand, like, where'd the loyalty come from? Like, I don't think he necessarily deserved immediate. Well, it wasn't immediate rematch, but beat Costa and then get the fight. So that was my only issue with like the main booking is that there's probably some other options I would have preferred over that. But I mean, they're both game to fight, so it is what it is. I'm sure we'll get that Chimaev one now, looking like he's the sole title contender after this. So I think we'll see how it's. Hopefully, it's better than the first one. I think that's a low bar, but also I think seen both ways. You're always worried about just the forward pressure, the striking. Like maybe Sean Strickland could get a decision. I mean, he's done it multiple times in his career, so there's always a chance. But I think what we've seen is since that fight, DDP has been on an absolute tear and has looked like he's been getting better every fight in all facets, really, too. With his striking, doing some nice things, some nice little techniques on the ground and stuff, wrestling, showing that his little drunken warrior never get tired, manhandle physical style of fighting is worked against like three different types of opponents now too. So um, this could be a little spot for DDP to maybe not only he beat him the first time a little questionably, but like definitively put a stamp on this and maybe even get a finish out of it as well.
Yeah, I agree that I don't really love this fight either, and I just think they kind of put the middleweight division in a tough spot because like you have Chimaev who beat Whitaker, so like that gets you a shot. Imavov beat Adesanya. In theory, that should give you a shot, but now both those guys are waiting for a shot because they booked this fight instead of Duplessis versus Chimaev. Like it just kind of messes up the whole run of things. But I think now that we have it booked, I think looking at this, it's a tough one to really preview, in my opinion, just because of the way these two guys fight. Like, how many guys go out there and fight like Duplessis, and how many guys go out there and fight like Sean Strickland? It's really just you got one example for both of them, so it kind of makes it hard to pull like historical thoughts from like different matchups and things. Like a lot of times you have thoughts on how like a wrestler versus striker matchup would go. How like a longer striker would do against a wrestler compared to like a boxer. Like there's different things that you can kind of draw from just theoretically from historical matchups. And obviously there's a little bit of uniqueness in every fight. But this is like two guys with like completely like self-orchestrated styles that don't really fight like anyone else. So that makes it kind of tough to say exactly what's going to happen here. But then you look back at the first fight, so you kind of have a roadmap a little bit, but you also like have to, in my opinion, at least acknowledge that the fight won't be the same. So now you're kind of left with these two weird styles. They've shared 5 rounds against each other. You kind of have to bet on one of the two fighters being the more likely to go through the experience of 5 rounds and go through the experience of a second training camp and getting to watch that fight back. And then that gives one of the two fighters a lot of opportunities to really think about how they can use their style to take to find success against the others. So I think it's really interesting in that regard. I don't know if that means the fight itself is going to be great, but I just think from like for myself, for someone who thinks about game plans and thought process going into fight, I think it's interesting in that regard. Um, and I do think it's going to be, like you said, it's a great opportunity for Duplessis to go out there and put a stamp on this. And I think he can, just based on the fact that when I look at what skills these guys used in the first fight, like Strickland was using all the skills he had. Like he was out there throwing his teeps. He was out there with the ones and twos, and he was being Sean Strickland. But you had Duplessis who was more boxing focused. I think he did a good job of the way he approached the boxing. Did a good job throwing in combinations to land like second and third shots. But he really didn't wrestle an extreme amount. I think he landed 5 takedowns, but it was a lot of like takedown, and not really much control time. I think he could approach this a little bit differently. We're trying to find he was getting the takedowns really easy. So I'd be interested to see if he, uses those takedowns to swing close rounds or if he uses them to go out there and like try and actually work to better positions, which I think he can do a little bit more, or actually probably a lot more than he showed in the first fight. Similarly, he didn't kick as much in the first fight as he usually does. So I think he could kick more here. So I just think that Duplessis is like the better fighter overall when you look at the summation of both of their skills. Who's definitely more physical, and I think that he can also like adjust the things he did to kind of make more improvement. So I like Duplessis. I think he probably gets that finish, but it's kind of hard with Sean Strickland because he may just go out there and stand on the outside and teep and do those things, and it makes it a little bit harder to find the finish because you still have to be calculated. So even if you're Duplessis, who I think there's a little bit more method to his madness than other people let on, but it's not like he's Pablo Picasso of MMA out there. He's a little bit willing to go and get sloppy and get chaotic. So even for him, I think the thought process is a little bit harder to get to where he can land those big shots. But I think he does do enough to win this one.
I think that's a good point too, because I know you always like saying like who could change in the second fight after fighting for 5 rounds. I think DDP has a lot more adaptability to his game, to where I
Mhm.
think Sean Strickland's kind of bread and butter. You know what he's going to do every time, and it works a fair amount of the time too. Also, like I always kind of lean in these fights. I don't know if Sean Strickland has any upside on finish, like knocking DDP out or finishing potential after 5 rounds with him. Yeah, because I mean he threw 419 strikes in this first fight. I'm looking at here, and he landed 183, 173 significant. So, but I just don't know if the finishing potential is really there against DDP compared to. I definitely think if DDP catches him the right way, he has that, and then as well. I think on the ground, kind of like you were saying too, I I would be more inclined to expect to finish 6 for 11, and for some better control time. And I know Izzy was a little stunned too before that takedown, but I mean that was pretty seamless right there with the get him stunned, get him to the ground, took the back, and then I believe got the rear naked choke right, and that Izzy one. So
Mhm.
I don't know. We'll see what happens here, but I definitely am leaning DDP. I was surprised too, though, that those odds were pretty close, even still, based on the other fights these people have had since fighting each other. But I think maybe that first fight was. I guess you do also have to give Strickland credit for how good DDP's looked in his like next couple, or the one even before that. I mean, Sean Strickland did make him go to a decision, and such. So there's a chance that Strickland has that little unique, forward pressure, a lot of jabs, stay on the outside, or yeah, stay on the outside, and maybe it's just not DDP's kryptonite per se, but it's gonna have him struggle a little bit compared to his ultra aggressive pressing forward against some other people we've seen. But I do like. I'm with you. I do like DDP. Um, I would say finish too for betting on some props here. I don't know. I'd have to look at the stats of by TKO or by sub though, because I don't know which one. I could definitely almost see like another knockdown submission like against Adesanya.
Yeah, so I can pull those up. I looked at them yesterday, but I don't remember them off the top of my head. Um, so the way the props are split up is Duplessis points is his most favorable outcome at plus 175, Duplessis KO plus 360, Duplessis sub plus 600. For anyone interested in the Strickland side of things, it's 260 for the points, 800 for the KO, 2,900 for the sub. And inside the distance, so to get the KO or submission, Duplessis is plus 190 and Sean Strickland is plus 700.
I was say,
And
you might as well
just
just take the Strickland by points instead of just
yeah,
taking the money line too.
yeah. And another thing about that is like that one thing that I find really interesting in that is Duplessis won the decision the first time. And the books are basically saying like, hey, he's 100 times more likely, not 100 times if we're doing the actual math, but he is way more likely to get the finish here. Um, and he won a decision the first time around. So I think that's just an interesting nod that he does have, the capability of go out there to get the finish while still being proven ability to go out there and get the decision win. A couple things I'll add is I do think it's important that Strickland finds a way to make fights simply closer than they should be. I think he kind of has that aspect to him a little bit. And I do dog on Strickland a lot, so I will give him credit as well. And the fact that I think he's really, really good defensively. Um, and I think after the Pereira knockout, I think he's made some adjustments in his defensive approach. I don't know that the offensive approach has changed much, but I think he's done some things defensively to shore some things up. That doesn't mean Pereira wouldn't knock him out again, but I think he kind of realized some of the flaws. I think he's gotten a little bit better, but that little bit better is enough to take him from like pretty good defensively to being one of the better guys defensively. Um, he's a guy who spars a lot, so he's really good anticipation, sees things coming, and that allows him to either roll with things, get his shoulders involved, get his hands involved, just because he can see things coming. So I want to give him credit for that as someone who doesn't really give Sean a lot of props for his game. His defense, and defensive instincts is very, very impressive. And then, um, on the Duplessis side, another thing I didn't really mention much was the physicality. He's just such a big and physical guy that when he goes out there and stands in your face, and it's like a very stressful experience of like he's got power in both hands and both feet, and like he's standing right in your face and can let those weapons go at any time. But also that physicality when he's grappling, like that can really wear on you and your cardio if you're getting taken down and having to work up. And every time that you get taken down, you've got a guy who is massive for the weight class and very strong, you know putting all his weight on you, landing a couple ground and pound shots. It doesn't have to be anything pretty, but like small things he can do to where if he lands 5, 6 takedowns and every time he's putting his weight on Strickland and he's mixing in a couple shots like that over the course of a 5-round fight can really wear on somebody. So I think those are a couple more things that I didn't mention the first time around that are probably important to add as well.
It's tough. Yeah. I mean, I guess I just don't like Strike because Strickland does always come in with good cardio too.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's going to hurt to where DDP might be able to gas people, other people sooner rather than later. Strickland might be able to hang longer. And I was going to say, because I was looking, is his only knockout still to Pereira? Or
His
at
only
least
knockout lost.
recently?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd have to go back a really long time.
Okay.
So, because I remember there was like the period of time where he got in a motorcycle accident. So it was like pre-motorcycle accident Strickland and post-motorcycle accident Strickland. And like since then, I think the only time he's been knocked out is the Pereira.
That's why, and I mean, what a person to get knocked out by, like no one's gonna blame you. And also, those were like maybe the two most picture perfect shots in a row. Um, so I mean, you can't blame him for what happened there. But yeah, that's why I was saying I'm a little inclined to take the sub because while I do still think DDP has the finishing potential both on the feet and on the ground, like you said, I mean, Strickland's defense is pretty commendable considering your only knockout loss, and he was fighting pretty frequently too. Was the other thing, and I guess if you're going to be a decision merchant, the one thing that does say is you are technically never getting finished, always getting to the end. So I guess there's a little bit of I don't know, success, and I don't want to give him too much hype, but it is what it is.
Yep. All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on this main event here before we jump down to the co-main?
Not really. Just
Okay.
I guess it's in Australia, right? So
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so there's going to be
no
a
like
time
specific
difference.
ties to anybody, but
Yeah. Sean Strickland got the Izzy win in Australia. I actually think Duplessis might have also got the Izzy win in Australia. So I think they might both be 1-0 in Australia, to be honest with you. So now I don't know if there's an edge there. I know Strickland likes to play the Australia, card a little bit more. He likes to kind of appease to that fan base, but he kind of does that every time he travels. Like when he went to Canada, he kind of played that a certain way with the Canadian fan base. So I think that's more of a thing that he does. And I don't know if he'll have the support of the home crowd. It's just kind of random that you got a South African and an American fighting in Australia, but
yeah.
like they kind of didn't really have a ton of options as long as it's getting a main event. Like somebody's got to show up and fight.
I was gonna say it's funny too because the American hates foreigners, but likes pandering to the crowds when he leaves America.
You said it, not me, but I'm not gonna say you're wrong. All right, let's jump down to the co-main where we have the American versus the Chinese. So, don't know where the Australians fall on that global conflict, but maybe we find out when they walk out. Weili Zhang versus Tatiana Suarez. Weili is currently the number one female pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Tatiana Suarez has fought inconsistently, but she has looked impressive when she has fought. The betting odds have it lined a straight pick'em, minus 113 on this app. That'd be minus 110. Other places, line has been teetering a little bit. Yesterday I saw Weili at minus 102 and Tatiana at minus 125. So it almost tipped over to a Weili underdog. It may have, since I've looked, it may have tipped this morning and then shot back when the plus money came up on Weili. But point being, this is kind of teetered, and right now we sit at a pick 'em, and I'd guess that it moves before fight day based on the fact that this is Wednesday. So a lot of movement in the line. Very close fight according to the bookies. What do you make of the UFC 312 co-main event?
I think it works for this card. I guess I'd say that. I mean, it's a good event. I think a lot of fans too are big Weili Zhang fans. When it comes to women's MMA specifically too, I think she's about one of the top champions you could watch, and that goes for over the past couple years where some belts have been limbo and passed around a little bit more and such. She was kind of always the rock that would deliver when it comes to women's MMA. She's had some great finishes too. Uh, I know I just saw whatever it's a Weili Zhang fight week too. They always do that Joanna and Jacek fight that always gets replayed and stuff. So I think this is she's one of the champions you can always put out there, and it should garner some attention. And I think Tatiana Suarez is is a good matchup too. Just that weight class is better than some of the other ones too, so that's why I think there's a lot more championship fights you can put on this weight class, and you got to be at least like, okay, I'm there for it, I'm interested enough, compared to some of the other women's weight classes where it's a real stretch to put these that high, as especially specifically as like a big co-main on a big card. But I think it works for UFC Australia.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting fight because Weili, in my opinion, is the number one women's fighter in the world, and I believe that's how she's ranked as well. But I think recently she hasn't looked unbeatable, I should say. I think that's a good way to phrase that. Sometimes, in the past, I've gone, there's no way someone's beating Weili. I haven't felt that way in recent outings as much. Even if it's small moments in fights that she dominates, you can see a little bit of, oh, well, that wasn't great, or, things like that. Yan Jiannan, for example, ended up having a decent amount of success and won some rounds in that fight, even if, the positive moments for Weili were still massive. And in my opinion, it should have got stopped at the end of the first round. But still, like, Xiaonan ended up coming back and landing some good shots of her own and didn't exactly look great on the Weili side. It looked like she was starting to slow down a little bit. She ended up picking it back up, winning some late rounds and doing so emphatically. So it's not to say it's all bad. I'm not trying to make that inclination, but if you were to nitpick, there definitely things you can nitpick for Weili. And if you go back to some like earlier fights, like Rose Namajunas spent a lot of time in top position against Weili in their fights. Obviously not counting the one that ended in the head kick, but the one that went all 5 rounds. Rose spent a lot of time in top position, and that had played a massive role in why she won the fight. And now she's going in there against a fighter who is really known for her wrestling skills. It's not to say it's the only thing Tatiana Suarez is good at, because I think she mixes in BJJ and submissions very well with the wrestling game, but her whole, her big thing coming into MMA was her high level wrestling background. And she is a great wrestler. It's a little bit weird because she has fought inconsistently because she is massively injury prone. But like, it only takes one night to win the fight. This isn't a whole season she's got to be great for. She only has to be 100% on Saturday. And if she's 100% on Saturday, she may just go out there and get the victory just based on going out there, getting on top, and spending a lot of time in a strong top position.
Yeah, I think I mean, and that's as we've seen, and specifically in women's MMA with Juliana Pena in those success fights. Those will win you fights. Specifically, those will win you championship fights too. Um, but I do think this is something because they've never fought before,
No,
right? Not
no.
even like a while back. So that would say this is good that there is some, like a fresh face in here. And I know I agree she didn't. She's looked a little bit more beatable because when she first took over the belt and stuff, and then had the war, she did look untouchable, but just because she was so complete. Like her striking was better than most. She had not only hands, but she had some good kicks of her own. Good gas tank. Was a little bit more physical than some of the other women in that weight class, and then had enough wrestling to where against a bad opponent or someone without wrestling should look like she had like elite wrestling until she ran into some more of the top tier talent in that division. But I do think too that Suarez could give her some problems, exactly like you said. It only takes one night. Um, and there's been a couple of those nights where, especially one of those Rose fights, I think Zhang just didn't look like she had it that night. So in someone that's a little inconsistent, I would say, um, every every championship fight or every 2 or 3 championship fights, there definitely is room to get upset here. I I did want to say too, and it's tough because I want to be like Jan Zanin did look good and was winning some late rounds. Although she should have been stopped off of punches and she was put to sleep in that octagon, and the ref still let that continue. So
Yeah, I had Weili Zhang inside the distance that night, and I'm watching that like
I did too. I
getting
had to.
ready to put a fist to the TV. I've never done that before, but if there was ever a time to start, that was the day. And yeah, so like that's the whole one of the whole things here. And I I'm interested as to the amount of danger Weili could put Tatiana in on the feet. Um, because for example, in that Yan Xiaonan fight, Weili grappled a lot more than she usually does. She went out there and out grappled Carla as well. Spent a lot of time in top position against Amanda Lemos, so she has not shied away from offensively grappling in recent fights. And I think that's a credit to her. I don't think that's a bad thing by any means. But now you're looking at a matchup where it would be not very smart if she went out there and offensively grappled, just based off the fact that then turns around and gives Tatiana more examples or more opportunities to grapple. So there are things like that concern me. Obviously, Weili still has the hands to go out there and compete, but I'm interested to see how much danger she can put her in striking exchanges, considering that her grappling offense probably will not be as potent as it has been in the last few matchups. And another thing I will note is that Weili, on top of like whether it be inconsistent moments or inconsistent fights, she also fights inconsistently. Has not fought since that Yan Xiaonan fight at UFC 300. I do not believe. Yeah, that was the only fight. Or no, yeah, only fight last year was
In
the
April.
Yan Xiaonan fight. In only fight in 2023 was Lemos, and then she fought twice in 2022, but that was, with all due respect, a little bit of the retirement circuit. And Ioanni Jędrzejczyk and Carlos Esparza, both those fighters turned around and retired shortly after. So the last, you know, 2023 and 2024, she hasn't been in the octagon as frequently, and that does drive concerns when we're talking about inconsistencies. Um, that's another concern that I have.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this is that Yon Zanan one did actually end up delivering a little bit, but
Mhm.
this is a one that I'm definitely excited for, though. Like I said, this weight class is probably amongst one of the more fun ones out of the three for sure. So I think this is a strawweight matchup that I think I would be excited for, and I'm excited to see if Weili Zhang can once again prove that she's still top dog and beat another contender, or it would be nice to see a little give or take, like you said, we'll see how many times if Tatiana Suarez were to win, if she could stay healthy and stuff. But it would be nice also to see a fresh face top the division, and which opens up a lot more matchups as well now after that. So I think uh, while I wouldn't love if this was like the main event of a pay per view card and stuff like that, I do think it slots in as a little nice, solid enough co-main on this Australia card.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Like, it's a pretty good fight stylistically, one that interests me. And also, like, I have nothing against Tatiana Suarez, but like, if she wins the belt, like, hold on, like, it's get ready for a rocky ride of when can Tatiana Suarez fight. I guess we're kind of doing that with Weili because we just talked about how she hasn't fought as frequently, but like it at least hasn't been public. You've just kind of been sitting there private. You don't have to see like every 2 months, like, oh, she's injured. Maybe she is behind the scenes, but like every time Tatiana gets injured, and listen, I'm not saying this to like poke fun at her or anything, but like it's an unfortunate reality of her career, and I'm sure she knows that as well, that she unfortunately gets injured quite often. So, um, yeah. So I wish both them well, but another thing I'll mention before we get out of here is I wonder if Weili would get a 125 pass to go up there with the win, because I don't know who the hell is going to challenge her at 115. Not even from a skills perspective, but like she's either beat all those fighters or no one's really earned a shot.
Exactly. I was looking to of that same thing, and there's just not much there after this fight, and that's a credit to her for, uh, for being not, I shouldn't say so active, but I mean, being a top contender for long enough to where she's beat a lot of these other people. But I think that's one of the downfalls of the division is the new talent's not really coming up yet, and then some of the good old talent has now retired. So Weili Zhang was kind of the bridge in the middle between both of those, but.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Moving on through UFC 312, like we said at the top of the show, there isn't any other fights we're going to go in detail on, but we'll do the due diligence of hitting this card with some final thoughts. I mean, there are a couple names in here that I think are worth mentioning. I unfortunately know more of these guys than I should just because of watching Contender Series as much as I do. I have a decent handle on some of these guys, but Anthony, we've got a couple main card fights here left, as well as the prelims. So there is a lot to pick from when you're thinking quantity. I wouldn't necessarily say there's a lot of quality to pick through. But is there anything that stands out to you on the rest of this fight card?
Um, One of the well, I wouldn't say he was not my favorite or anything, but I did always kind of like Jimmy Crute, and I know this is one of his first times being back in the octagon. And I think it was since 2023, and he only fought once in 2023 too. But he was. I don't know. I always liked his fights. He was always a name I didn't mind checking in on. I do remember, and he had a little run there going, but then lost to both Anthony Smith and Jamal Hill pretty bad. I think KOs both of them. And then I remember one of his fights. It was on that same fight card. I think maybe it wasn't the same fight card when Chris Weidman broke his leg, but I remember Jimmy Crute in one of his fights got the drop foot thing that Sean O'Malley had too. So I mean, just it was a lot of injuries and knockouts mixed with injuries. Kind of unfortunate. Took his time off, so at least now I'm excited to see him back in the octagon and kind of in front of his home crowd too,
Yep.
or okay, in front of his home crowd. So that's always nice. And then the only other name I was gonna say, I'm not gonna talk about the Justin Toffa fight, was is Jake Matthews. Same way, just another person that I've always when I see him on a card, most times I'm like, okay, you know, should be fun enough. We'll get some striking in there, and he usually I'm it's like fight of the night turn thing, but it usually delivers for what it is, especially if the matchup's right.
Mm-hmm. Matthews is another guy who really hits some highs and lows. I've seen some Jake Matthews performances that are like holy hell type stuff, and other ones are just kind of like, not that the fight itself is bad, but he doesn't feel like he fights to his top potential. On the opposite side of that Jake Matthews fight, there's Francisco Prado, who I liked Prado at lightweight. This is his first fight up at welterweight, and I remember him saying he wanted to move up to welterweight, and I'm sitting at my TV going, "No, no, absolutely not." I think he's very dense. He's kind of like I hate doing this, but he's kind of like Taporia at 145. Where Taporia is shorter, and you wouldn't necessarily suspect that he needs to move up. Um, and that's kind of the way Francisco Prado is like built, where he's a little bit shorter and stockier, where he probably holds more weight than other guys. But like, there's a big difference between going from 45 to 55 compared to 55 to 70. He may be falling in a little bit of that tweener realm. But regardless, like from a skills perspective, his boxing is really really good in my opinion. Um, Interested to see how he looks at welterweight against a guy in Jake Matthews, who like Jake Matthews is no like bum for you making your welterweight debut, and like it's not a fight where you're just gonna walk in and take somebody's head off. So really interested to see how Prado looks there. I will quickly touch on the guys on this card on contenders. So for anyone watching can kind of get a little bit of a feel for some of these guys. Um, Taliesin Teixeira fighting Justin Tafa. Teixeira, the contender series guy, he not terrible for a heavyweight prospect, but like I was never like, oh, here we go, this guy's going to be ranked. Like sometimes you can just tell with heavyweights they have like some functional skills. Teixeira not bad, but he's just like big and long and hits hard. But like outside of that, like I'm not sure he's going to be any good. But like there's kind of a chance. I don't know if that makes sense. Like he's not going to come in here lose 3, but like he might lose this one against Tafa and not look great. Like it's a very live possibility.
God, a heavyweight sounds so fun, dude.
Yeah. Then we have Jonathan Mikaleef and Quinlan Salkid. These are both Australian guys. To be honest, I get these guys confused for one another a little bit. If I remember correctly, Salkid was a little bit better. Salkid was a long guy, mixing things up, hit kind of hard, decent skills. He's fighting an absolute bum and Anshul Jubilee, so he'll probably look really impressive. Not sure if that means he is going to be impressive long term. Mikaleef, honestly don't remember a ton about him off the top of my head, but that means he is probably in my tier of guys that are like unimportant because I usually remember guys. I have tiers who are good, bad, and then there's just like a blob in the middle, which is like the most random fighters that like are gonna go 2-2 and get cut and nobody will care about. That was probably Mikaleef if I can't remember him. And then we have Cody Steele, 7-0, making his debut against Zhu Rong. Cody Steele was, I believe, in my top tier of prospects. So he was top 5, top 6 of the 40 so guys who got signed. So he's the best of the bunch. Lightweight, worth looking out for. Good grappling skills, really physical. So I think he's, if you're looking for one of the contender series guys, he may actually be the best of the bunch. And then last thing I will shout out, not a contender series matchup, but Colby Thickness, 7-0 Australian, trains with Volkanovski. He's taken on Alexandre Topuria, Ilya Topuria's younger brother. So it's like a Topuria and Volk little showdown again. And, you know, you kind of get each guy's, I don't want to say worst version, but
Not them.
And I don't want to say like you could say coming up prospect in the thick knees aspect of things, but I think Alexandre Topuria is like almost the same age as Ilya, or he may honestly be older. I think he's older. So like I can't really say he's the young and up and comer compared to Ilya because he's older, but he's the up and comer. We'll just leave it at that. Worth watching, I'd guess, just based on the camps and last names involved in that one. So that's kind of touching on some random fights, but contender series guys, and then a couple other ones that are worth noting.
The last one I had too, because I had heard, I thought of some of Cody Steele, so that makes sense if you were saying he was one of your top guys, because I thought that name I had heard before popped around. And the last one I was gonna say was the Jack Jenkins one, because I remember he had a little, I don't know, can't remember where he came from and all that stuff. But I do remember I thought there was a little bit of hype surrounding him for his debut, but then he fought Herbert Burns, so I don't know if you can really like. It's not going to get you much like high praise from me because I think a lot of people should probably beat Herbert Burns. So I was curious just what you remembered about him or what you thought about him, and then I do not remember that Gabriel Santos fight. I saw he had one fight, and that didn't really ring a bell.
So on the Jenkins side, he starts off with impressive performances, gets into contender series. I don't really remember his contender series fight, but he gets a win over Don Shannis, and he basically just leg kicked him all night long. And then he had a close fight against Jamal Emmers. I think a lot of people thought Emmers won that, but it was close. And then prior to that, to his regionals, he was finishing dudes with leg kicks. So that's where he got all the hype, was from murdering dudes with leg kicks. And then he gets in there with Cheppy Mariscal, and he goes in, he wizards during a throw, I believe it was. Yeah, it was something with the throw, and his shoulder popped or his arm broke, or I don't remember the exact sequence off the top of my head, but he was injured pretty badly. Was out for like a year, then had the comeback against Herbert. So pretty respected prospect, and Jamal Emmers is a pretty good win for a prospect, even if it's close fight. So, and then the Santos side of things, Santos 1-2, but he had his debut was a split decision against Lerone Murphy, where he looked great against Lerone, and then he went out there with David Onama, got sent to place unknown by an uppercut, and then he came back and beat a guy. So Santos is much, much, much better than his 1-2 record suggests, just based off the skills he's shown. He's got like impressive win, got caught by Onama, which, hey, that happens. Onama just got ranked matchup against Giga Chikadze. They announced that yesterday. And then Lerone Murphy going to split decision, short notice. And I believe that was in London as well. So short notice on the road. He's a good fighter.
Excuse me. And then I was gonna say, I don't know if my thing's messed up. Is that the headliner of the prelims?
Yes.
Okay, so that's, I just said that was the other one I was kind of interested in, and now after hearing all that, I definitely it's gonna be up there for me then.
Yep.
To keep an eye on.
Yep. All right. Moving over to UFC Saudi Arabia, we'll talk about the main event in Israel Adesanya, Nassourdine Imavov, and then we'll touch on Jairzinho Rozenstruik getting cut, give our thoughts on that, and then we'll do final thoughts roundup as well. Israel Adesanya versus Nassourdine Imavov. Imavov, second round knockout. What'd you make of Imavov's performance, and what'd you make of the fight as a whole?
A little bit smaller of a scale, but I guess I do got to start respecting, or I do got to start respecting Imavov's like power necessarily, but his ability to find that one shot, because give or take, it was so early into the second round, but I thought Imavov was losing that Jared Cannonier fight for multiple rounds, and then finds the one shot, has him stunned, and then give or take early stoppage, but he was getting on him, and effectively, that's the other thing, is some fighters can stun people, but they don't have that like finishing instinct to necessarily get him completely out of there with a knockout, or at least put the pressure on the referee to stop the fight. And in this one, I had Izzy winning that first round. And I thought Izzy was looking really good. And then Imavov finds that one shot, gets him good, and then stays on him. Because if anything, it was that second shot, that uppercut against the cage, that was like, okay, this is probably, he's probably not going to get out of this. And then give or take again, another kind of early stoppage. I know some people were saying online, which is unfortunate for Imavov, because he did have a great performance. But overall, I thought, I mean, you just beat Izzy. I think, like we said before, I mean, give or take how we feel about him, some of the holes in his games, the things he does good. If you can beat Izzy, I mean, that's a respectable win for sure.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I see a lot of, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second too, but I see a lot of people like being like, oh, Izzy's done, he should retire, this and that. He looked sensational in the first round. In the first round, Izzy won 4 minutes and 55 seconds of the first round. Landed some great shots to the body. After the fight, you can see, or maybe it was in between rounds, like Imavov's side is red. Landed like a beautiful switch kick, like within the first 20 seconds of the fight. Izzy did a lot of great things in that fight, and he was investing in the body, which I thought was going to pay off late. Did way better than I was expecting defending the grappling. Almost landed a lat drop of his own, which for anyone who wrestled, like lat drop isn't day one stuff. Not saying it's, world class level technique, but like it isn't just like as easy as, doing a lat drop, like it's a little bit harder. So like he did some impressive things. He gets caught with an uppercut. Good shot by Imavov. Tricky shot. Izzy didn't see it coming. I think it was a little bit more. I don't think it was as damaging as it was like head snaps back and it looks really damaging.
That was the
Just
one
because
in the
the
first,
angle,
right?
yeah, the angle he hit an uppercut from, like his head bounces back, like, um, and then when he pressures, Izzy lands a counter, during the finishing sequence, which is interesting because Jared Cannonier landed one of those as well, but he landed the counter and that kind of stopped the Imavov pressure. Um, and prevented him from really pouring it on there. So I thought he did, aside from getting hit touched with that uppercut, like I thought he looked really, really good. Um, and then when Imavov lands a shot in round two, does a great job timing that up with an Izzy stance switch. Puts that straight. Um, kind of it wouldn't or not really straight, kind of a little bit more of a hook, but lands the long right hand. And like you said, that second shot he lands afterwards is probably did more damage than the first one. Um, I would agree that it was an early stoppage, just from I think the way you should be looking at stoppages, which is the way the rule is like um you're intelligently defending yourself. When you're looking at what Izzy did, um, he goes from being leaning up against the cage to giving his back, which makes it harder to get hit. That's an intelligent defensive position. And then he's trying to get his hips under him while he's on the ground. So he's trying to get his hips under him because that's how you have to start to work up. You got to get your hips back before you can take a step up. So as he's doing that, he's pulling the head back and trying to block a little bit with his shoulders. And Goddard steps in. As you can see, his hips getting higher, so he's trying to work up. So I just think was a little bit of an early call there when I think he was doing things. Doesn't mean I wasn't hurt. Doesn't mean he wasn't going to get finished. But like, he was intelligently defending himself when the fight was stopped, in my opinion. And the the same thing with Cannonier, which I guess it's a separate discussion. But he was throwing counters, which is a form of intelligent
Yeah.
defense. Like he actually
That one
landed a
was so
counter.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah, he landed a counter, and I'm not trying to make it seem like it's Imavov's fault, but like just for Izzy, I think it was an early stoppage for his side of things. With that being said, like a lot of respect to Imavov because he landed the right hand regardless. Like how many guys landed that shot on Izzy? Sean Strickland landed a shot on Izzy. I believe it was the right hand as well. Set up differently. It was Strickland timed up a hook rather than a stance switch, but he timed it up, landed the shot. He couldn't get the finish. Imavov did because of the second shot that he landed. So credit to him for that. And then even looking back at like the Pereira fights, not to say that Imavov's a better striker than Pereira, but like the first time that when Pereira got that stoppage in MMA, it was more of like an accumulation thing rather than a one perfect shot put him down. So lots of credit to him for being able to find that shot. Lots of speed and power on that shot, and du Plessis as well didn't land a shot like that. So I think just looking at what he landed, whether it was an early stoppage or not, there isn't just people doing that on Adesanya on a fight-to-fight basis. So lots of credit to him. And I think it's important to note that Adesanya was having a really good fight before that. He didn't look washed because that, in my opinion, also makes Imavov's win more impressive when you can note that it wasn't, a washed Izzy in there, in my opinion. It was a very, very talented fighter that he was in there against that he landed the knockout shot on.
A couple things. One, that's funny. Even look back on that prayer one. That one was considered a little early by some too. But exactly what you said was the only reason. Like that was my biggest issue with the stoppage. While I do think there's a great chance he still gets finished in that moment
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. I get, he was covering his head a little bit. It was blocking that, blah blah blah, but not blocking enough. A lot of
Yep.
punches were still getting through. My one issue was he was literally like, yeah, like you said, getting his hips under him, and as the fight's getting called off, he was like literally raising or like pressing up too. So I just thought sometimes you got to look up at the fighter as a whole, because if you're looking at his upper half and his head, you're just seeing punches hit him. But if you're looking at his lower half, he's literally taking all the steps that are necessary to try to get up and defend yourself. So I agree, that was still intelligently defending himself to me. The other thing I was going to say, specifically tied in more with the knockout too, or with Izzy's performance. I'm glad you kind of thought the same thing. I thought he looked really good, and I was actually kind of already prepared for, well, if this fight gets to 3 and 4, I think Izzy might get the knockout. Like I was already kind of going that place in my head because the fight or the strike that knocked out Izzy or stunned him. I watched Imavov whiff on that like 4 to 5 times in that first round, like not even close. And I was like, oh, well, this it's like I was like, Izzy's movement's looking really good right now. Like he threw that like little right overhand or whatever, like 4 or 5 times, and it was not close. And then almost the first time throwing it, and the second one clocks him. And so the last question I was gonna ask was, would you have did you put anything on the eye poke into fighting again? Or some people say got poked in the eye, knew it was off, immediately stance switch, all that. I was gonna see what you thought on that little controversy.
Yeah, I don't know. I will say, like, just take the time. Like, I don't know that we should take anything away from Imavov's performance for that. Like, I probably won't take stock in that when I'm looking at like future Imavov fights. But if I'm looking at a future Izzy fight, like you said, he wasn't getting hit with those shots in the first round. Um, Maybe like it's entirely possible. There's been different fouls in the past that I think have been more impactful on fights than that one. But I do think in that situation, like, man, just take the time. Like, there's just too much at risk. And maybe it's just coincidence that he gets hit right after. Maybe it's fate. Maybe who knows what it is. But, like, maybe his eye is messed up right after. Maybe it wasn't. Like, it's really hard to say. But, like, I would have, like, take just, even if you just separate to the corner. Like, that's the one thing that I like is, like, even if you're going to take 10 seconds, like, you're not taking a large amount of time, at least, like, separate, go to the neutral corner, and then start it off in the middle. Um, don't get in a position where you're, like, didn't even check yourself. Don't put yourself in a position where the other guy is trying to close distance. Like, I didn't watch that close enough to see if Imavov was trying to sneak in and close the distance during that time. Um, but like, don't put yourself in that position when you, especially when you're the one being fouled. It's not like he was the one who did the foul and then tried to take advantage of it. Like, he was the one who was fouled. So I would have preferred to see him take the time, and I don't really know how much weight to put on that, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, regardless of that, I think it's hard to dictate the fight off that little thing too. I don't
Yeah.
think it's not like it was an egregious eye poke where he like you saw that like, oh my god, that was almost like a knuckle deep, but anything.
Yeah.
But I do think that's why I just never understood why you don't take the time. And now, I mean, it's really, you know how online like social media is, that two people take anything and run a mile with it, but it is that one little extra thing to like add to the fight, which in other words was like Izzy was having great performance. Yeah, it just always, it's gonna suck when something like that happens 5 seconds before kind of the end of the fight or the knockout punches landed. So
Yeah. I agree with you. Um, all right. I I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I think that, like, for me, middleweight is like Chimaev gets the next title fight. So we've got Strickland, Duplessis, like we just previewed. Winner of that fights Chimaev. So then you've got Chimaev lined up versus Strickland or Duplessis. Then the winner of that fight fights Imavov. Like, that's just kind of how I map this out in my brain. Do you have any different opinions on that?
um that would just require, you're basically saying Imavov stamped himself with a title shot. It's just he has to wait for it.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have a problem with that. Because yeah, I guess where else would you go really? That's why I'm always a fan of, because that's gonna be two different. I guess it doesn't really, not really two when one's happening this weekend. So yeah, time frame still works on that. Then I was
Mm-hmm.
gonna say, whenever people have to wait 2 fights down the line, it gives me a bit of pause because it's like you could just fight someone else, but then that's how people get screwed out of title shots too, though. So it, I'd give it to him. I think he's beat enough names. Even though I've had some pause about some of his performances in these fights and there's early stoppages, I do think when a winning fights is winning fights. So I wouldn't mind it. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And like, I don't know what else he would do. Like, I guess the one thing you could do a couple things. I guess you would have a Kyle Baralho option, but to me, in my brain, it doesn't really make sense to take the hype of an Izzy knockout, ride it into a Baralho fight. To me, that kind of gets like mixed up a little bit, because not that you're moving backwards like Baralho sucks, like he's really, really good, but like Baralho now needs to go fight like a Whitaker and Adesanya or one of these guys to then get to that point. I guess the one thing that I could see is Imavov versus the loser of Duplessis and Strickland. I think that would be a possibility.
That's where I
But
thought
like,
you were gonna go.
yeah, I don't hate that. Like, if they did that instead of the title fight, I would say okay, but I would probably just let him sit out because he beat Adesanya. And like Chimaev beat Whitaker and he beat Adesanya. So like, hats off to both of you guys. We'll give you both title fights in my eyes. Like, then again, if it were my opinion, Strickland wouldn't be fighting for the title
Yeah.
right now, and like we wouldn't be in this position because it'd be Chimaev fighting, and the winner would then call out Imavov instead of Chimaev, and there just wouldn't be a line right now. But that's not the world we live in, so I'll just
I,
leave it.
I was gonna say real quick too. I agree because I don't think that, in my perspective, that'd be like Baralho didn't really deserve that shot. You're like,
Yeah.
because if you're doing everything Imavov just done, you're giving Baralho the chance to beat him once and like take credit for almost everything that Imavov just did. And the other thing, I guess, with Imavov fighting the loser is if Sean Strickland wins or loses, it just gives Sean Strickland another chance to like win once and then like jump the line again. So, which we do not want.
Yeah. Actually, a decent outcome would be Baralho fighting the loser. And then if he wins, he can get a title shot. And then that's just assuming like whoever is champ, like get on your bike, like like if it's Duplessis, like hypothetically, like try and get 3 in this year, like the division. We finally have interesting title challengers, and like there's guys who can fight for the belt. Like he's got a chance to really kind of stamp a couple here in a row, and it could end up being a good year for him if he could do one now, one middle of the year, one end of the year. Could end up being a good run of 3, like hypothetically, if it's Duplessis. But like he could go Sean Strickland, Chimaev, Imavov. That's like fighter of the year potential, depending
Hmm.
on how other stuff works out. So that obviously, I mean, I'm just chalking him up for 3 wins.
Yeah.
There's a lot that can change. Like he might lose Saturday. Who knows? He might get injured and pull out like Saruki, and you never know in this sport. All right. I guess we should probably touch on the Adesanya side of this before we move on. I mean, I don't think he should retire, but like I have no clue what to do with him. Like I have no idea who he should fight, and it's kind of like if you don't do Baralho, you're kind of looking at like Baralho or Strickland or Duplessis, the loser. And outside of that, you're getting to like Brendan Allen and
That's
like
true.
Anthony Hernandez, and like I just don't know. And then you're also getting to Vittori's and Cannoniers and guys that he fought during his title reign. So I don't really know where to go with Adesanya at the moment.
Yeah. The name, because I wouldn't want that Braho one for him. I saw Allen. I thought that was deep enough. Maybe he doesn't have to keep fighting. But that's to say it's tough because these were the same problems when he was champion as he had beaten everyone, and now we're running into him again. But I guess too, I gotta flip the brain a little bit. Understand that he's not just a champion, constant fighting, 5-round fights and championship fights and all that. So maybe like an old man fight against Cannonier would make some more sense or something like that. Put him against I don't think he wouldn't fight Whitaker because they're training together
Yeah.
now and stuff.
Whitaker, I
So
think Whitaker said he wouldn't fight Izzy. I think
okay,
he said no to that.
so
But and
you might have to drop down to like an Allen.
the other problem is Allen's fighting Fluffy Hernandez coming up in Seattle, and Cannonier is fighting Gregory Rodriguez
Oh, you said that,
next
yeah,
weekend. So like this could, and like something feels wrong about a Gregory Rodriguez and Israel Adesanya
yeah.
fight. And like Anthony Hernandez, like I kind of know how that one goes in my head, like personally. Like I
That's
know
why
how
I don't
that
want
fight
that to
ends, and
happen
like
either.
Anthony Hernandez, I'll just say, is much better than people give him credit for, and that's probably like a pretty good matchup for him. And like I like Anthony Hernandez, think he's a good guy. I'd like to see him succeed, but like at some point, it's like we can't just sell Adesanya down the river here. We can't
Uh-huh.
just give him the worst possible stylistic matchup and be like, "Hey, good luck, man. You've lost 4 of your last 5. go out there against the cardio grappler. Like, kind of, you can't really do him like that.
I think the one thing I actually would maybe want to see is the rematch against Strickland,
Mm-hmm.
just because there's not a lot of finishing potential there, which is good for Adesanya getting older. But just to see how that, if it was a one night thing, like he was on top for so long and slipped up, maybe, and give or take, he was getting older and stuff. Like I just wanted to see if that was a fluke upset, or so I wouldn't mind seeing that again, or maybe it just truly is a bad style matchup for him too and stuff.
I agree with that. And another thing is, first of all, I think still believe he has the skills to compete at that level. First of all, and second of all, there was that whole thing where like he wasn't mentally there for that fight, and he had the DUI like 10 days before. Like, there's a lot of things that happened before that fight on the Adesanya side. I'd like to see him, like, for me, if you book Adesanya and Strickland, I feel like that's one where he's like, that's when I got to get back. Like, I can't lose that one again. Like, he just counted that up as a layup. And I feel like the du Plessis fight is more like, man, he got me. Like, he's good. But I feel like in my opinion, outsider looking in, I feel like he looks at the Strickland fight more like I let him get me. He didn't get me. I wasn't prepared. I let him beat me because of myself. So for him, that may end up being a motivation to go out there, perform again, and one he can get up for and train for. So I'd agree. I think that's not a bad one. And it's wild that we're talking about trying to come up with a fight for Izzy, and we go to the guy fighting for the belt, and we're also talking about like Brendan Allen. Like it's like wild that but that truly is the range. Like I can see arguments for both, but I do think that I like the Strickland matchup. The more I think about it, the more I like it. All right. Moving on to a piece of news. Jairzinho Rozenstruik loses his fight at UFC Saudi Arabia against Sergey Pavlovich, and he gets cut. What are your thoughts on the UFC cutting Jairzinho after this fight? Well, maybe he didn't get cut. They obviously haven't reported whether his contract was up or whether he got cut. So that should be noted as well. But what are your thoughts on the UFC seemingly no longer being interested in being in the Jairzinho Rozenstruik business?
I mean, I was just real quick checking if he's already out of the rankings then.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, looks like it. Okay.
And guess who's in him? I believe it's like, oh my God, who was it? Dontel Mays. That's who took his spot. Like, oh my God. Talking about like, hell, maybe Italian Teixeira is the next best thing for sliced bread.
That's what I was saying. And people like love heavyweights for some reason. But no, I think it's crazy. He was 4-1 in his last 5 before that fight, I believe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I think because he had 1-2, lost 1, then 1-2 again. I thought when I was checking,
he was on a good run. He had at least 1-2 in a row,
and he was fighting ranked people too the whole time. Like he himself was a ranked fighter. I don't know. It just doesn't really make sense. It seems like I don't know. I want to say too, not try to be too hard, but it's like almost a bad look. It seems like you're disrespecting your own weight class if your own ranked fighters are that expendable to where they could be doing good, they lose one fight and you cut them. I just think that shows that weight class is not that good. As much as they try to sell them and always book them, make them the main events of fight nights and stuff. I don't know. It just seems it's crazy that this is the best promotion in the world. This fighter could be ranked like 8th or 7th, loses one fight and he's cut. To me, I don't know. That seems really weird to me.
Yeah, I agree. And like, it's weird to me in the fact that like where I believe he currently is, I think he's a guy who, I picked him, so I was wrong there. But like, after his performance, my takeaway was like, all right, he's just not going to get to like a top 5 level. And like when he loses bad. Like he just can't find the shot. And when he can't find the shot, now we're just kind of poking at each other from the outside. And if he gets taken down, like he can't get up, it's not his fault Sergey Pavlovich became a wrestler against him, to be fair. Like I think Sergey Pavlovich he didn't exactly impress me in that fight either, but he won, so he gets to stay on the roster. But like cutting Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and now we're seeing guys just like move up the rankings just by like not getting cut. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what has Dontel Mays ever done to deserve a roster spot? I'm pretty sure he lost to Hamdi Delahab or whatever. Or he had like a really close fight against that guy. Oh yeah, he did lose, but then Hamdi popped for PEDs. That's what that was. Like, it's just really weird to me that you don't get to see Jairzinho Rozenstruik fights, but now you're in like random heavyweights that nobody thinks even have a good skill. Like, at least I thought Jairzinho Rozenstruik had certain skills that were good, and I don't think that's true with some of these guys that we're now going to see. Like,
I mean, he was a big swinger too, but at least he had some other skills. He wasn't just a literal only thing he could do is overhands and hooks or whatever.
yeah, yep, yeah. And even if that was a terrible performance, like, okay, book Dontel Mays against Sergey Pavlovich. Like, let's see how that goes, please.
Especially if wrestling's the game plan.
Yeah. Like, we can book a lot of guys against Sergey Pavlovich, and if they don't look good, like, all right, adios. Meanwhile, Tai Tuivasa, I love Tai Tuivasa, but Tai Tuivasa still has a roster spot. He just got worked by Jairzinho and has just been losing.
He's like, 0-3 or 0-4.
Yeah.
Bad little streak.
Yeah. And like, Jairzinho beat Shamil Gassiev, who now all of a sudden everybody loves because he knocked out Thomas Peterson. Like, people don't even know who Thomas Peterson is, and now Shamil Gaziev, the next best thing. Like, he didn't quit against Gaziev or against Rozenstruik. Like, Gaziev quit and didn't want to fight anymore. Like, that, maybe that's the right call just for career longevity, but that's what happened in that fight because he didn't have the cardio to compete for 5 rounds, and he was getting hit in the face a lot. It sucks, but that's now the guys who are getting into the top 10 just because we cut guys who beat him. So it's a wild one to me, and don't think it's a great look. But I will say Jairzinho Rozenstruik is now the best free agent heavyweight there's been in a while. And if you're bare knuckle or karate combat, like, I'd sign Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Like, or if you're PFL and you need a Francis Ngannou opponent, like, is this not like 100 times better than what you're gonna find just sitting around on the open market? Like, if I were any of these other promotions, I'd be, all right, let's go get Jairzinho Rozenstruik.
Yeah, that was one of my first thoughts too. Is I think he's still a capable fighter and everything, so I think other promotions should jump at him. And then I was gonna say there was 2 things. While I try, I thought he was just gonna be. He's a gatekeeper, but that's fine because every division has those. Like Neil Magny, he's still fighting, and I'm saying Neil Magny should get cut it off, but I'm just saying he's a gatekeeper. There's some people that once they have a certain amount of fights in the UFC, you kind of see where they're plateauing at, unless something drastically changes. But they're not going to be a top 5. But they're also you keep giving them younger, up and coming prospects or people that have holes, and they'll beat them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where he was at. And then the last thing I'll say was just if you're cutting someone because they lose to Sergey Pavlovich, like what does that say about Pavlovich? Like who is ranked, whatever, top 5 or something. But
yeah, I believe he's got to be top 5 because Gan, Volkov, Aspinall are the only guys you can put above him with a like actual.
Maybe Almeida.
Yeah, even then that'd put him at 5 if Almeida was above him. So yeah, top 5 guy. So if we start cutting guys for listening to top 5 guys, hey Adesanya, pack your bags. Like there's a lot of guys that gotta get out of here. All right. Let's finish off today's episode with some final thoughts on UFC Saudi Arabia. We have a couple options here because, we only really talked about 2 fights. So there's a whole plethora of fights to talk through. Are there any that stand out to you among the rest?
I'll cover some quick ones. Like you said, the Gazia knockout. I would say Terrence McKinney McKinney kind of steamrolled that dude. That wasn't even like a 1 punch or anything. It was like a lot of punches and strikes. So, but like we called it, there was the finish. Now the other ones I guess I'd say real quick on was the Fares Ziam. I don't know why. I haven't been doing that good on my picks this year, and I keep fading myself. Like because I said I was rooting for him. I like him, and I liked his chances in that fight. But then I was like, oh, well, let's not take the underdog. I can't remember if he was underdog, but I was like,
Yeah.
let's just go with the other dude, and then he wins. And I did that too. I was big on the Marab over, but I was like, let me go with the more not smarter decision or safer decision, and just take the Umar because he has more methods or whatever. But so I've been fading myself. I need to stop doing that. But I thought we said it looked really good. Striking was good. Uh, offensive wrestling was good, and then his defensive wrestling once again, still very impressive. Or as for where it was, getting better, and still showing that. I think the other dude went 1 for 8 or something on
And apparently
takedowns.
his knee can just bend in every single direction
And then
possible.
I saw that was
Yeah.
that's my dude has like I don't know gelatin or jelly in
Yeah.
his legs, no actual bones. Um, and then the final one, which I'll kind of leave up to you to go talk more about, but was the char bullet did get a little fraud checked finally, just so we can finally take the victory lap. It's just not as sweet when it's a decision loss to Michael Page, but
Yeah, that was tough because I picked Shara,
same.
and I
Even
really
though I
only
wanted MVP,
picked them because they were in Saudi Arabia. Like I was like, there's no way they aren't robbing MVP blind. And I said last week, like, the only way that like MVP wins this fight is if he has to go make it abundantly clear. And I think there was a long period of time before Charbullet landed a punch to the head. So he made it like very hard to get himself robbed. Um that so I feel kind of relieved in that aspect of it. And the craziest part about that fight is Michael Venom Page is on bottom with 7 seconds is when it starts. When the fight ends, from that 7 seconds, the amount of time it took him, he would have gotten a triangle choke. If there was 30 seconds left when he hit the mat, he would have landed a triangle choke. He did the hard part of the triangle choke. All he had to do was finish pulling the leg over, take the arm to the other side, pull it down, and he had it. Like that's how bad Charbonneau's grappling is. Like people don't realize like how terrible his grappling is. He grappled Michael Venom Page for 10 seconds and would have got choked out in the triangle. Like that's bad. That's really, really bad. So that should be noted. But yeah, we were right on the Shara Bullet fade in the fraud, but we didn't get to pick, which is kind of bugs me. And like I
exactly.
didn't get to
It's
bet, so it's
horrible.
like I've taken every opportunity possible to be like, hey, I don't think this guy's very good. But then the one time I was like, I definitely picked Armin Petrosian, and like this is the one I don't take.
It's because it was in Saudi Arabia though.
Literally.
Because I remember real quick. I know there was a stat. I don't know if it was just in Saudi Arabia or like couple like when they do
Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi. There was yeah, one I thought one other place too in that Middle East. But if you're like if your name ended in like V, like Nurmagomedov, they were like 22-2 over there. But also because they get lighter matchups. But the other thing was the or the decisions were 13-0 in favor of like people
Yeah.
like that. And I was like, and give or take, some of them are probably just winning clear decisions. But the fact that every little split goes that certain way, I was like, eesh.
Yeah, there was the Renat Fakhreddinov versus Carlos Leal last time in Saudi Arabia. That was like, oh my, like that was bad. And like
Mm-hmm.
this card had the Hamdi and um
First one on the
Jamal
card.
Pogues,
Yeah.
which I was kind of
I,
listen. It was that fight sucked, and I didn't really pay much attention. But a lot of people think it was a robbery. So
I was seeing, like I said, I missed the first fight too. I was hearing it was like 75% of people were saying that Pogues won that.
yeah, um, another one I will shout out because they got the decision right. Vinicius Oliveira and Saeed Nurmagomedov. Vinicius went out there, pushed the pace, made that sloppy, and it worked out for him. He was the one landing takedowns by round 3. Spent a lot of time in top. Saeed did his cool kicks for a round and then completely gassed out. Vinicius Oliveira, slightly better cardio magically, but it was enough to get the job done and spend some time in top position. Judges rewarded him, thankfully, because that one was close enough to where like I've seen worse robberies, and I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was gonna be one, but the judges got that one right. So Vinicius, good performance and 3-0 in the UFC with wins over Said Nurmagomedov. Ricky Simone and Bernardo Sopaj. So like fairly good run for a guy coming in off contenders who in my write-up, I read it before I read it last week. My write-up at the time was like wild card, like gonna go out there, do crazy stuff. Like I said he had a better chance to be good than other guys who are complete wild cards, but like his outcome as a guy who is just gonna go do crazy things in there is been pretty good to go 3-0. Usually those guys fall on their face pretty hard at some point. He has yet to do that and Saeed Nurmagomedov is like close to getting a ranked fight. I don't know if he'll get one since he's only won 3, but like he's getting there.
And I would say, like I said, I don't think Ricky Simone is someone a wild card beats all the time too. That's why I kind of like Ricky Simone. And then the thing was, didn't he call out someone crazy after the fight?
He called out Umar. Yeah,
that's who it was. Yeah, okay.
And then he was on Ariel Helwani's show either today or yesterday, and was like, "I'd beat Merab." He'd be like, "He's like, everyone's scared of getting taken down by Merab. I'll get in his face and pressure him. I'll make him tired." Everyone's like, "I don't know, man."
That would be he'd have to extra secret sauce it, and then we'll see if which one wins.
Yeah, he'd have to spend some time with some doctors and physicians, but maybe it's not impossible, but I'd say it's highly unlikely. But I will say Vinicius Oliveira, I think, has been he's really only been in the UFC for like a year, has been entertaining and put on some good fights. So I think he's, at least in the short term, been a good addition. We'll see if he can get better and like really do something long term. But short term, I think he's been fun for as long as he's been here for. You have any other final thoughts you want to touch on before we close down the show today?
No, I think that was it.
All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in to Vendetta Sports Media and 8-Sided Freaks. Make sure to like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and go to vendettasportsmedia.com for more content. Right now is NBA trade season, so there's a lot of NBA stuff up on the site right now, but we still have our UFC previews that have all our picks in them for the entire main card. Still have best bets on the UFC section as well, and some post-fight stuff, so you can get UFC articles up there. And we'll be back next week. We'll have to probably do something similar to what we did this week, where we don't spend the full show talking UFC 312. We'll probably do main and co-main and see what we can scramble up, whether it be a preview of the following fight card, which is the Cannonier and Gregor Rodriguez.
Couple good fights.
Card. Yeah, that one's got a couple good ones. Or we'll hit some news depending on what has been announced. So we'll kind of play that one by ear, but we'll probably have a little bit more than the traditional pay-per-view recap. So similar to what we did today. And like I said, thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll be back next week. Hope you are as well.